Amen. Hebrews chapter 1 for our study this morning. 13% of Americans claim to have seen one. 1 out of every 10 pop songs in the last 30 years mentions them. They've been featured on the cover of Time, Newsweek, Redbook, and Ladies' Home Journal, and are the subject of many primetime TV specials. Know what they are? Angels. Angels. There seems to be a renewed interest in these supernatural beings in our own day. Quite possibly because they are popularized by such movies and TV shows as It's a Wonderful Life, Highway to Heaven, Touched by an Angel. But you know, ours isn't the only generation preoccupied with angels. It would seem that the people to whom the book of Hebrews was written were equally captivated with an interest in angels. In fact, the Hebrew mindset was such that next to God, angels were like the most important beings in the universe. They believed that when God said in Genesis 1:26, "Let us make man in our image," that he was actually talking to the angels. And they believed that the law given by God was actually delivered to the hand of Moses by angels. And with such a focus and such a preoccupation with angels, it's easily understood how these people were, somewhat prone to maybe even worshiping angels. In fact, we see such accounts even in our Bibles. You remember in Revelation 22 how at the end of that incredible heavenly vision John beheld, he fell at the foot of the angel to worship him. When the angel scolds him and says, "Worship God and Him only." And that really now, as we continue our message in the book of Hebrews, our study through this book, is the message of our chapter 1 before us this morning. For we looked at the first 4 verses in an introductory setting last time. We'll review them this morning. But really, the whole point of chapter 1 is that Jesus is better than the angels. Notice as we begin in verse 1, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds, who being the brightness of His glory and the express image of His person, and upholding all things by the word of His power, when He had by Himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Note this: having become so much better than the angels, as He has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. And you know, as we introduced the book of Hebrews last time, considering these verses in some depth, you may want to pick up the tape or CD. We noted how the theme, the message of Hebrews, is that Jesus is greater than any religious figure or any religious organization or order that has ever existed. Jesus is greater by far. And the writer of Hebrews goes on now to point out 7 things in these opening verses that distinguish Jesus in His superiority over any other religious figure. But before he does that, notice how he begins by pointing out that we worship and we serve a God who speaks. Our God isn't silent. Our God isn't at a distance. But God desires to speak and to communicate with us. I pointed out last time how I believe that God speaks more than we sometimes want to listen. And I don't know if you've observed this, but I certainly have, that we live in a day of noise pollution. Have you noticed that around you? In my particular neighborhood, hey, have you happened to notice that the mountain is growing? Some of us are excited about that. Some of us are, boo-hooing that. But in my neighborhood, we have a whole new sound of power saws and air hammers and bulldozers and construction equipment as they are building 186 new homes behind my house. Oh boy, there goes the neighbor. No, fortunately, it's a gated community, a very lavish and nice neighborhood. But noise pollution. Those of you that live a little closer to the highway are enamored by the highway noise and the ambulance sirens and all the rest of the noise that daily demands the attention of our ears. And sometimes it's challenging for us with all this noise pollution to distinguish the voice of God when He's trying to speak to us. He's talking, but are we really listening? Because there's so many things demanding the attention of our ears. Those of you that know me well know that I'm losing my hearing. Yes, your preacher's going deaf. I think it's probably in due partly to the fact that for many years I was a law enforcement officer and unfortunately involved in shootings out in the field where I didn't have the benefit of ear protection like on a range. And believe me, when a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun goes off at about 3 feet's length from your eardrums, it really leaves some repercussions ringing in your ears. And I had that on more than one occasion. But I rather like to describe it in this sense. Rather than losing my hearing or becoming deaf, I kind of like to tell my wife that, well, I've just got a case of selective listening. You know, it's not that I don't hear, I can't hear you, but I have the opportunity now to pick and choose what I really listen for. You know, I can tune things out and rule it off to being hard of hearing, and I have to really concentrate and focus in on the things that I want to hear because of my selectiveness in that way. But God speaks, and we see how He has spoken to us by His Son in these last days. And then the writer goes on to list 7 attributes, 7 characteristics that distinguish the superiority of Jesus Christ over anything and anybody else. Remember what the 7 are? I'm not going to quiz you, but if you don't, write them down right now. We see the first one there in verse 2, whom He has appointed heir of all things. Jesus is the heir of all that the eye can see, of all that the ear can hear. And as we noted last time, the beautiful thing about that is over in Romans chapter 8, we are reminded that we are joint heirs with Jesus Christ. In other words, all that's His is mine, and all that's mine is His. Who gets the better deal in that arrangement, huh? Think about it. He is the heir of all things, but not only that, through whom, number 2, also He made the worlds. Jesus Christ is the Creator. He's the one that has made everything that I can see. He's the one who's created, not being created Himself. And we read in the book of Colossians how we were created for His, and in Revelation chapter 4, we were created for His good pleasure. Thirdly, we see how He is the brightness of His glory. We read of the Shekinah of God back in the Old Testament, the glory that dwelt between the cherubim, the glory that illuminated the holiest place. Jesus is that glory personified, come if you will, in human flesh. Fourthly, we see how He is the express image of His person. In other words, Jesus is a spitting image of His Papa. He looks just like His daddy. That's why He could say to Philip in John 14, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He is the express image of the invisible God. Next, we see how He upholds all things by the word of His power. He is the one who holds everything together. He's the one that keeps the atom intact when, in fact, scientists tell us that the forces should be repelling. And, of course, that's the concept behind the atomic bomb, is unleashing what's natural in the atom. But He holds it together. And if He can hold creation together, and if He can hold the heavens together, then I can trust Him to hold my life together when the world around me is falling apart. He holds all things together by the word of His power. And when He had by Himself purged our sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Jesus, that great and final sacrifice for our sin, the final penalty paid for my punishment. And the fact that He sat down, as we shared in our last study, was revolutionary to the Hebrew mindset. Because the high priest, when he was ministering in the temple, never sat down. There were sacrifices to be made. There were animals to be slaughtered. There was incense to be offered up. There was showbread to be made. There was all this stuff going on. He never rested from His labors. But Jesus said, it is finished, and sat down. at the right hand of the Majesty on high. And then seventhly, and we'll go on to consider this in some depth this morning because that's really what the rest of this chapter is about. The writer says, having become so much better than the angels. You see, with their preoccupation with angels, with their tendency maybe in temptation to even worship angels now, the writer of Hebrews is going to go on to show how Jesus is superior to angels. Jesus is superior to these supernatural beings that the Hebrew mindset ranked right next to God. And he goes on by asking in verse 5, for to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son? Today I have begotten you, and again I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. To which of the angels did God ever ask that? None of them. Not Michael, not Gabriel, not Lucifer. None of them. This is something that was unique and expressed only to Jesus Christ. But here's what trips people up sometimes. They interpret the fact that he is the Son of God to mean that he was created by God, therefore he is something less than God. But listen, and this is important. Jesus did not become the Son of God until he was born into this world. Did you hear me? Jesus did not become the Son of God until he was born into this world. He was, is, and always will be the second person of the triune Godhead, the Trinity. He became the Son, humanly speaking, when we read in Philippians chapter 2, he humbled himself, taking on the appearance or the likeness of a man. That is when he became the Son of God. And so it didn't happen until his incarnation occurred. Jesus was, is, and always will be the second person of the Godhead. And we go on in verse 6 to see an insight, and really this chapter is just lavish and rich with insights on this very point, the deity of Jesus Christ. For verse 6, but when he again brings the firstborn into the world, don't let that phrase trip you up. We'll talk about what that means here in a moment. But when he again brings the firstborn into the world, note this, he says, let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels, he says, who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire? And so we see how God commands the angels to worship Jesus. Problem: if Jesus isn't God, then God is violating his own word. You see it there? For God is the God who says you should worship nobody before me. You should not have any other object of your affection or of your worship. Worship God and serve him only. And if God is telling the angels to worship Jesus, then he is breaking his own word. Unless Jesus is God. You see, again, I draw your attention to the fact here in verse 6 that we read, when he again brings the firstborn into the world. How that trips a lot of people up, the word firstborn. A lot of people misunderstand that word firstborn in purely physical terminology to mean the first one born. I mean, the firstborn in our house is my daughter Melinda. Stephen would be secondborn, Timothy third, and AJ, well, he fell in there somewhere, number 4. But anyway, that humanly speaking is the way we tend to look at this term. When in fact, from a spiritual and more importantly a scriptural application, it doesn't mean that at all. For we see people spoken of as being firstborn when in fact they weren't. For example, back in the book of Psalms, 89 and verse 20, we see how David is described there as the firstborn. And yet we read how he was the least, the last, the youngest in the house of Jesse. We read over in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31 and verse 9. How Ephraim there is described as the firstborn. And yet we know that Manasseh was born before Ephraim. And there are several other illustrations of this in the scriptures. And so immediately we're confronted with the fact that firstborn may mean something more than what our puny brain computes it to mean. When in fact, when you take it in the scriptural context of meaning, the word firstborn simply means a position of highest honor of position. And in fact, when we see how the angels are commanded here to worship Jesus, that becomes clear, isn't it? Jesus holding that highest position of honor. That's what firstborn means. It doesn't mean he was the first created being, as some would have us to believe. But please understand that we begin to see here in verse 6 and what's going to follow some of the greatest testimony, some of the boldest declarations concerning the deity of Jesus Christ, the fact that Jesus is God. Now, having shared that with you, as plain and simple in my Bible as that is to me, sad to say that not everybody believes that Jesus is God. Listen to these words taken from the Quran. The Quran says, they do blaspheme. Those who say that God is Christ, the Son of Mary, if they do not desist from their word of blasphemy, a grievous penalty will befall them. Christ, the Son of Mary, was no more than a messenger. Many were the messengers that passed away before him. That is Islam's view of Jesus. As I've had opportunity to minister to Muslims, to speak with Muslims, that's exactly how they view Jesus, as just one of a long line of messengers, including their own prophet who came after him, Muhammad. Christian Science says on page 361 of their book Science and Health, quote, Jesus Christ is not God. Charles Russell, one of the founders of Jehovah's Witnesses, said the phrase Son of God refers to Jesus as a separate created being, not as part of the Trinity. As the Son of God, he could not be God himself. And then Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, says that Christ is the firstborn spirit son of the eternal family. He advanced and progressed and became like the Father. So we see how not everybody believes in what the Scripture is declaring here. Not everybody believes that Jesus is God. It's going to get even bolder in the next set of verses, but we're not there quite yet. Because one of the first proofs that I see establishing the divinity, the deity of Christ, is the fact that God tells the angels to worship him. And listen, friend, if the angels are to worship Jesus, then you and I are to worship him as well. Worship. It is what we were created to do. It is the very focal point of this ministry. We are to come to services like these with hearts prepared to worship. Because a worshiping church is a powerful church. A worshiping church is a vibrant church. A worshiping church, a church that worships in spirit and truth, as Jesus told the woman at the Samaritan well there in John chapter 4, is a church that is experiencing the life and the abundant life that Jesus Christ has to give. But sadly, worship is elusive in many churches today. One observer has noted that the problem with most worship services, listen, you're going to have to listen carefully to this. The problem with most worship services is that the minister is the actor, God the prompter, and the congregation the audience. When in fact, in true Christian worship, the congregation ought to be the actor, the minister the prompter, and God the audience. Do you see the difference, folks? In too many worship services, the worship flows this way, when in fact, true worship ought to flow this way. Now, having said that, put your hard hats on, your steel-toed shoes, because I'm about to offend some of you by saying this. I am not as concerned about what you think about our worship service as what God thinks about our worship service. Hear my heart on this, friend. I am not as concerned about what you think about our worship service as what God thinks about our worship service. I've discovered something about worship. And please hear me, understand this, folks. Worship is more than the singing, the music, that stuff. You're just saying, thank God you're not our worship leader. That's about the extent of my musical skill. Praise the Lord for the likes of Jeff Armour, the ladies, and Gary and others that are part of our worship ministry. But the worship of God is much more than this. It is the Word. It is serving. It is selflessly giving. All of that encompasses our expression of worship to God. But I've discovered something about worship in musical terminology, in musical sense. And that is that aspect of worship is susceptible to personal taste. You know what I'm talking about? Let me give you an example. You know, I've been a Christian now for, oh heavens, I've lost track. I think maybe going on 30 years or something close to that. 20, how long have we been married? 28 years, huh? 27 years of being back with the Lord. And then 2-3 years before I backslid. So what's that add up to? 29, 30, 31, something like that. Anyway, here's the interesting thing. And somebody's ringing. Here's the interesting thing. I'm taking a cruise around the neighborhood with my boy, running some errands. He pops one of his favorite Christian CDs in the CD player. You know, my ears are ringing. I cannot hear what they're singing. And I look to AJ and I say, that's Christian? So I pull one of my dinosaur CDs out. They didn't have CDs when I was listening to Christian music. They've remastered them. And I pop it in the CD player and he looks at me and he's like, that's Christian? It's all a matter of taste. Let me bring it down even more simply. You can reduce it even like this in areas of, say, diet. You know, some of us like a particular kind of food over others. And it's obvious what my favorite food is, you know, junk food. But when I was a kid growing up, I had a grandmother that was just enamored with eggplant. She loved eggplant. And she forced eggplant on things, and you go, oh, and that's what I did. Oh. To where I have developed a godly despise and hatred for eggplant. I see absolutely no purpose for eggplant. I think an eggplant looks like a grape that has been nuked, you know? I mean, what a big purple, oh, yeah. So what does the Lord do but send me to parts of the world where their staple diet is eggplant? I'm in Turkey. I'm in Iraq. We minister to Iranians, and I'm sitting there, eggplant for breakfast? Eggplant for lunch? Oh, please don't tell me eggplant for dinner. Yes. They're consumed with eggplant. They love it. I don't. And I've come to learn that is because of personal tastes that we develop over a lifetime. There are things that you like that I don't, and that you don't that I do. And so it's all about personal taste. Now here's where it comes into the scheme of ministry. There are churches that will wear themselves out, weary their ministers trying to please people's taste. Try to meet everybody's appetite. Try and serve up with the, oh, you want burgers? We'll give you burgers. Oh, you want, omelets? We'll give you, you want pizza? We'll give, And so we have this smorgasbord mentality in Christianity to where the focus of the church is no longer worshiping that way. It's no longer heavenward and God-centered, but now it's become man-centered and body-oriented to where we now have churches that have traditional services for those that like traditional music and contemporary services for those that like contemporary music, and then you got a hybrid like us that is kind of somewhere in the middle, but then you got the user-friendly where you can come in and everything's just the way you want it, and then we have the seeker-sensitive, oh, don't tell them about Jesus, don't preach against sin because that'll step on toes. And we weary ourselves trying to meet people's personal taste. When in fact, all along, the one that loses out the most in that is God. For the ministry ceases to be God-centered and starts to become man-centered. Now, it is true that ministry involves people. But I believe that the ministry we want to experience here at Calvary Chapel, and in fact are enjoying, is the byproduct or the dividend of our ministry being right with the Lord. In other words, if your ministry to God is intact and it's got the first priority in its proper place, then as a byproduct, the natural outflow of that is the Spirit is going to be ministering to God's people. He's the head of the body, and we all know that without the head, the body dies. Everything that functions in your body this morning comes from those little signals sent from your cranium, your brain bone, and without it, you would cease to be. I believe the same thing ought to be true in the body of Christ, and that is that the body is ministered to from the head. And as long as we keep Jesus the head of this church and the focal point of our worship, then ministry and worship is going to take place, and we are going to experience the power of God in our midst. That's what we want to do, saints. And so those of you that I've offended, you can fall back asleep now, and we'll continue on without you. Verse 8, man, it gets better. Listen to this. But to the Son, speaking of God, to the Son, he says, your throne, O God. Did he just say God? Yeah, he said God. We'll talk about that in a minute. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than all, or more than your companions. Now don't miss what's happening here, folks. This is monumental in the Scriptures. We have the Father speaking to the Son, and he says, your throne, O God. Whoa, wait a minute. Did God just call Jesus God? That's what he did in my book, friend. And let me tell you, that if God calls Jesus God, that's good enough for me. That pretty much settles all the debate, all the argument. We read back in the Gospel of John how John called Jesus God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We read later on in that same Gospel how Thomas, who was a doubter, says, I'm not going to believe until I see him. Well, Jesus made a personal appearance. Thomas saw him, and he fell at his feet. He said, my Lord and my God. And here, God calls Jesus God. That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. So the next time somebody on Saturday morning on your doorstep wants to tell you differently, take them to Hebrews 1:8. Ask them to explain what's being said there. They won't be able to, at which time you may politely invite them to excuse themselves from your doorstep. Because you see, this area of the deity of Jesus Christ is non-negotiable. We can agree to disagree about a lot of things in Christianity. Pre, mid, post-tribulation rapture. Hey, I don't care. I'll explain it to you on the way up, okay? Not a biggie in my book. You know? Do you baptize by immersion, sprinkling, spitting? No biggie. You know? Hey, Jesus spit? Come on, give me a break. Remember the guy who was blind? Spit made mud. Now, what would you do if you went into your doctor's office and he did that and charged you for it? Whoa, you'd be looking for another doctor, wouldn't you? Hey, good enough for Jesus, good enough for me. There are negotiables in the faith. There are things that we cannot be dogmatic about. There are things we can agree to disagree on, and I do with many ministers in this community, and they with me, and that's wonderful. But one thing that is non-negotiable in the Christian faith is the deity of Jesus Christ. If you do not believe that Jesus is God, then you are in the wrong church. There are others out there that will gladly welcome you and brainwash you, indoctrinate you. But that is a given, and it is non-negotiable. Jesus is God come in human flesh. And so again, to the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness, hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God, people go, wait a minute. If he's God and yet he has a God, when he was a human, this is speaking of his humanity. Again, as Jesus was walking this earth as a man, he had the Father as God over him. Jesus called God, the Father God in the gospel. God calls Jesus God here in the book of Hebrews. Hey, don't let it trip you up there. Verse 10, we begin to wrap up. And you, Lord, in the beginning, laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Again, he's the creator. They will perish, but you remain. They will all grow old like a garment. Some of you are feeling like that this morning, aren't you? Like a cloak, you will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not fail. Later on in this book, we're going to read that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Though heaven and earth may pass away, Jesus Christ will never pass away. He is the creator. And hey, I think we're living in the days that could quite possibly see what's being described here. Like a cloak being folded up and the heavens being rolled up. And I think the end, man, is right around the corner. You've been watching the news. Pretty cool what's going on in California right now, huh? They're rocking and they're rolling, aren't they? 4 earthquakes of sizable magnitude in the past week. Now, it's really cool. I was talking to Richard, who's back there running our media booth this morning. And, they took the junior hires over to camp last week. No sooner had they pulled into Southern California, they take a potty break in Palm Springs. They go into this little convenience store, and there's the clerk stocking shelves. What Richard thought is he was simply stocking shelves. What he didn't know, as the clerk explained to him, is they just had an earthquake and everything fell off of the shelf. And Richard's like, oh man, I missed my first earthquake. Bummer. So what does God do but pull a rerun? They're there at summer camp with the junior hires, and for guys like Richard and some of the others with him, man, it was the first time they'd ever been in an earthquake. They're like, whoa, the ground's shaking. What is this? It wasn't just one, it wasn't two, man. They had 4 earthquakes last week. And did you catch the news? The California, Oregon, and Washington coast, for a short time there, were on tsunami alert. Whoa, now there's a word that didn't exist in my vocabulary before December 26th. Tsunami? My goodness, is it conceivable? Is it possible that such a disaster could strike the American coastlands? The experts tell us, oh yes, absolutely. Hey, CERT team, get ready, man. We may be moving sometime this summer. Who knows? Incredible what's going on. But I think that God is kind of sending a wake-up signal to the sleeping church, saying, hey, pay attention here, man. My coming is nigh. The days are short. The heavens are about to roll up as a scroll. The earth about to melt down. Whoa, heaven and earth may pass away, but Jesus will never pass away. But to which of the angels has he ever said, verse 13, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool? Again, the answer is to none of them. None of the angels, not Lucifer, Michael, none of the boys were ever invited to sit at the right hand of God. That is a place exclusively reserved for Jesus Christ. Again, noting how the fact that he sat down means that his work of forgiveness of sin is complete and finished. He could say from Calvary's cross, it is finished, and mean what he said. You sit down when you're done with your work. Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father. Now, as a side note, you students of Scripture, you know what's fascinating about that? As Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God, there are a couple of places in the New Testament where we see him standing. Remember what they are? Over in the book of Acts, when Stephen was being martyred, and he cries out to the Lord, he looks up and he beholds this heavenly vision, and there is the Lord standing. It's as though Jesus stands up, man, when one of his saints enters into glory. wow, kind of like a standing ovation. Later on, we're going to get to Hebrews 11, Hebrews 12, that describes, since we have this great cloud of witnesses, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And we're going to talk about, man, how there are folks up there in heaven, man, just cheering you on. And Jesus, man, is like, I don't want to misrepresent the Lord here, but I think that his standing when he receives us into glory is kind of like that ultimate cheerleading session. It's like, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your Lord. And Jesus is there, yeah, you did it, you made it. And so we see him standing as saints come into glory. Are they not all ministering spirits, speaking of the angels, sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation? That's the role of angels. They're not next to God. They're nothing more than ministering spirits assigned to minister to you and me. Now, some of you, your angels are going to be very noticeable in heaven. They're going to be the guys that are banged up, walking on crutches in wheelchairs. They're going to be the ones that are like, wow, I'm glad they finally made it. Now we can go into retirement. These are the ones that for years have been protecting you from that catastrophic head-on collision that didn't happen, from that T-bone at the intersection, from that drug overdose, or any of the other kinds of things that could have befallen your life, man. Your angel right there taking care of you, protecting you. Oh, they're going to be relieved when we finally get there, aren't they? But listen, as we close this chapter, and as we consider the greatness of Jesus, with all this talk about Jesus being greater than anything else, the question has to be asked, is he greater than anything else in your life? Because if he's not, then all we've done here for you is an academic exercise. I've wasted 45 minutes of your lifetime. Is he greater than any heartache, tribulation, trial, temptation you're facing? Is he greater than your greatest fears, your greatest worries? Is Jesus greater than anything else in your life? Do you have the faith to believe that your greatest spiritual days are still in front of you? Or are you sitting here this morning thinking you've seen the glory, you've seen your prime, and now it's downhill from here? Do you have the faith to believe your greatest victories, greatest blessings, and greatest provisions from God are yet future in your life? Or are you content to just kick back, hang out, cruise along? Friend, there's mountains God wants you to climb. There's victories he wants you to experience. And there's blessings that he wants to pour out upon your life. That is the message of Hebrews. The message of Hebrews is Jesus is greater by far. It encourages us to press on in the faith and to stop just being what you are and hanging out like you do. In the words of James MacDonald, stop lingering at the cross and move on in growth and maturity in Christ. God did not save us to get our sorry selves into heaven. He's called us to press on to higher ground and deeper things. That is the message of Hebrews. Do you believe it? Do you want to just hang out, linger at the cross, and be like you've always been? Or do you want to press on and gain that higher ground and experience those greater victories and come to enjoy the abundant blessings of God? Or you want to just kind of cruise? You see, the book of Hebrews is going to challenge us. It's going to stretch us. And yes, it's going to press us as it encourages us to press on to higher things, deeper things, a closer, more intimate knowledge and relationship with Jesus Christ. Are you ready for that? I don't know about you, but I am. Will you stand with me as we pray?